Hello, this is Steve Dudley of InSight Crime, talking to you from Managua, Nicaragua. We're talking to Douglas Farah. Douglas Farah is a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He recently gave a testimony before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs about narco-terrorism, and we wanted to explore some of the aspects that Doug had touched on in his testimony, in particular an aspect regarding super fixers. Doug, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about super fixers.
Well, hi, Steve. Super fixers is sort of a figure that has emerged in the post-Cold War era as you see terrorist groups needing certain facilities provided to them by a small group of people, transportation, documentation, money movement facilities, etc., that merge very much with the organized crime structures that already exist. And this is where I think you see the terrorist groups overlapping somewhat with the organized crime groups. And one of the premier examples of super fixers would be someone like Victor Bout, the Russian weapons merchant, who was able to provide air transport and weapons to a multitude of groups, sometimes on the same side of the Civil War, to the Taliban, to the FARC in the late 1990s, to a whole host of actors who needed his services. He was able to put them in touch with the people they needed to be in touch with, or deliver the goods himself without regard to ideology or theology or any of the old sort of confining mechanisms that the Cold War had imposed.
Why are these guys emerging? What are the circumstances under which a super fixer emerges?
Well, I think it's when different types of groups need the same services, and that one person is uniquely positioned to provide those services. For example, with Victor Bout, he was uniquely positioned to acquire weapons from the former Soviet bloc, which were accessible to him from his former intelligence background and his work in the intelligence services with the former Soviet Union and then with Russia, and his access to aircraft. So he had two things that many people wanted. But if you look at other types of super fixers, you find people, for example, in Latin America that can provide safe passage of either cocaine or weapons or migrants, almost any product that you would put in a pipeline. They control the access to crucial points along that pipeline and can let those products pass. And so if you need a piece of paper to get a package across, or if you need false documents to get immigrants across, or a paramilitary commander or a FARC commander, they provide multiple services, but they seem to, in my experience now, provide them to almost anyone who can pay for them, as opposed to being a paramilitary operation or a FARC operation or a Russian intelligence operation. These people serve just a really broad range of people who can pay them.
What does this mean in the criminal world of today, that there exists a super fixer? I mean, does it mean that ideology is completely washed away, that loyalties are different, that structures are different? What does it mean for you that someone like this, or an operative like this, can emerge?
Well, I think it is probably very close to the end of ideology, if not the complete end of ideology. I think one of the things that's really fascinating, and you know is more than anyone, if you look at the Central American structures or even the Colombian structures now, you now have paramilitary groups working with the FARC. You have the FARC working with old alliances in Central America, but also very tied to what was the structure of the far right for drug trafficking activities. You have sections of the different parts of the ideological spectrum that were at war throughout the 1980s, now able to come together and form these mutually beneficial alliances. And I think what's really terrifying about that is that the baseline is that they bring multiple skills together that were, but instead of using those skills to try to attack the other side or keep the other side marginalized, they're now able to work together. And so you have former FMLN special forces, former right-wing special battalions that the U.S. trained. You have former Sandinistas, you have former Contras, you have former everybody, Guatemalans, all involved together now in one, mutually benefit. That's not one giant enterprise, but able to ally with each other to carry out a much more lethal form of transnational organized crime than we saw before.
Do you see this transferring into the type of danger that Washington seems to be focused on? In other words, does this translate into a a terrorist group liaising with a criminal group in Mexico, which would then transfer some sort of terrorist threat into the United States? Do you see it going that far?
I think what you see is I think that the Mexico case has some interesting anomalies which would need to be explained to be able to figure out what was actually happening there. I think on a broader level or a more macro level, you do see the ability of groups like Hezbollah to come into an area and operate under the protection of other groups for fundraising or other activities. The ability to, or the desire of a state or non-state actor to go into Mexico to hire someone to carry out an attack in the United States, I think is, it's not an MO that we have ever seen before, and it's one that requires.
Of course, just a little background. Of course, we're referring to the case in which a supposed car dealer or at least someone with some connection to the Iranian forces, special forces, the Qad force, met up with and possibly tried to arrange some sort of attack on the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. This case, of course, broke a couple weeks ago. But I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
No, what I think you find in that case is it's not the normal operating mechanisms that the Quds Force would use. They're very, professional, select force, and to wander into an area where they don't know the players on the ground and sort of look around for a hitman, it's a little problematic. But something was going on. I think something was happening there, but either they got really sloppy or someone was freelancing on their own in the name of the Quds Force, or had a connection to the Quds Force and thought their actions were being blessed by that group. But it's not. It wasn't a structural alliance, which I think is what the long-term worry would be. But because of the cultural differences, the language differences, the ability of the cartels in Mexico, particularly in down Central America, to understand that is the one thing that they don't need to do is attack in the United States. That's the one thing that would make their lives infinitely more difficult. So to do, supposedly this person was willing to carry out the attack for $1.5 million, which is in the narco world, chump change. It's not something you would carry out. You would risk your entire structure for if you were willing to do that. So I think that doesn't. I think the cartels have been quite careful to stay away from knowingly aiding terrorist groups. Now, I think there are certainly the possibility of second, third generation Lebanese diaspora, other groups coming in, Spanish Atajas coming in, different groups who look Latin, who can speak the language and can pass as anyone could through their pipeline without due diligence being done because they don't do due diligence. But if you show up as Hezbollah, Quds Force, Al-Qaeda, any of the other groups out there and say, this is who I am and I want to do business, I would wager a huge amount of money, well, not that I have a huge amount, whatever money I had, I would wager that they would not accept that proposition because they don't want to be mixed up in that knowingly.
So in other words, I mean, if you remove ideology and you put at the center of everything the attempt to gain money, there is still a cost benefit that they have to measure out, and in this case, the cost benefit is if I'm the Zetas cartel, which was the cartel that was allegedly being recruited in this case to attack the Saudi ambassador, then I would have to say to myself, is it worth it for us then to just simply burn all of our bridges, into the United States and have all the force of the United States fall upon us? So I guess my question has always been motive. I mean, are these guys ever going to have any real motive to assist in a quote-unquote terrorist attack? What do you think?
Well, I think that even in their fragmented state, the Mexican tells us the likely answer is no. Now, I think the one sort of caveat to that is you do have a lot of young shooters with very little world experience who may not think the process through as the old style leadership would have, or even the current leadership may. And so I think that knowingly they wouldn't do it. But I do think that if you were to put a person who spoke native Spanish, didn't have a, didn't look in any way or act in any way alarming to them, into the system and ask them to transport them, I think that that would happen. Or if you put packages in there that you want to deliver it on our side of the border, that they're not going to say, that looks like a suspicious package, let's see who the addressee is and do the due diligence. But if you say, here's a bomb component, they'll say, no thank you. Or if you say, I'm Hezbollah, they'll say, no thank you. And if someone were to approach them, I think, rationally and say, we would like you to carry out an attack in the United States, that, I think you wrote, or someone on InSight Crime wrote, that, the one thing that these guys have going for them is a massive structure in the United States. It's fairly low profile, not heavily attacked by U.S. law enforcement. They're able to operate under the radar in multiple hundreds of cities here. So the one thing that would crush them is for the United States, they wouldn't even have to go across the border if they moved into the cities and seriously targeted all of these groups and their gang allies and all these other things. They would take a major hit that would be worth many multiple millions of dollars more than the $1.5 million is being asked for in this case.
Agreed. Doug, thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch.
Always a pleasure. I love your site. It's been great.
Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.